Welcome back to the Fish and Game Commission meeting. Dr. Schumann, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So for today's Marine Region Update, we're doing something slightly different. We've been hearing a lot lately about the abnormal ocean conditions that California's been experiencing, the warm water blob, Godzilla El Nino, a lot about the crab and impacts to, potential impacts to human health and closures related to safety. What we haven't heard much about are the potential ecological changes associated with some of these abnormal conditions. So we've asked Dr. Cynthia Catton from our invertebrate team to give a presentation on what we're entitling the perfect storm and some observations we're seeing on the North Coast in the kelp forest communities up there. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Catton.
Welcome, Dr. Catton.
Thank you very much, President Sklar and members of the Commission. As Dr. Schumann mentioned, I'm part of the Marine Invertebrate Management Team. I'm stationed out in Bodega Bay in Sonoma County. Our team annually conducts surveys of the ecosystem of the kelp forests in Sonoma County and Mendocino County, primarily to help inform the management of the red abalone fishery on the North Coast. We wanted to share with you today some of our observations and our concerns about the kelp forest on the North Coast and the impacts that we're seeing to the red urchin fishery and the red abalone fishery on the North Coast. If I could get the slides up. Both of these fisheries on the North Coast are economically important. The fished areas are north of San Francisco to the Oregon border, although most of the fishing activity occurs within Mendocino and Sonoma counties. Both of these fisheries rely on healthy kelp forest ecosystem, and kelp is the primary food source for both of these species. What we're seeing on the North Coast is a collapse of the kelp species, and the cause of that is what we're calling the perfect storm of multiple large-scale stressors. And I'll get into the details in a little bit about what these series of events were that led to this. But first, I wanted to give you an idea of the magnitude of the impact that we're seeing to both the kelp forest and to our fisheries. The photo here on the left is a pretty good example of what we're seeing in our kelp forest right now. It's no longer really a kelp forest. We're calling this an urchin barren because it's dominated by purple urchins. You can see these purple spiky things climbing up the bare stalks of the kelp, and they are voracious eaters of kelp. The purple urchins are not the primary target of the urchin fishery, so they can easily take over a kelp forest. The maps on the right show our data from our kelp flyover data that we've been taking for over a decade with the department. These are 4 sites within Sonoma and Mendocino County. They're important abalone fishery sites. The green indicates where kelp may live, where we've found kelp in the past. So in 2008, you can see a lot of green. This is where the kelp is reaching the surface waters. In 2014 and 2015, we're seeing hardly any kelp reaching the surface. So for the last 2 years in a row, we've seen starving conditions on the North Coast, and we see this borne out in some really unusual behavior of the abalone. We have some very large abalone climbing up these bare kelp stalks to the top looking for fronds, and they're not finding them. We also see little tiny abalone that they're no longer in their crevices. They're out and about looking for food. These are really unusual behaviors, but we are seeing them more and more often in the last 2 years. These starving conditions are having an impact on our fisheries. If you look at the photo on the left, that's a picture of the product of the urchin fishery. The red urchin fishery is marketing this bright orange reproductive organ of the urchin. The size and quality of that reproductive organ is dependent on the amount of food it's able to eat. And during 2015, during these starving conditions, we've seen a 66% drop in the catch and economic value of the red urchin fishery on the North Coast. We're also seeing evidence of shrunken abalone in the fishing grounds. This is a picture from a fisherman of one of 3 of his daily catch that looked like this. This is a very weak abalone. It's very small, muscular foot that keeps it attached to the rocks. It should fill out the shell. This is not due to disease, but due to starvation. This is particularly concerning moving into the winter with all the big storms, particularly with this Godzilla El Nino year. Really big storms we've seen on the North Coast. It can very easily dislodge weak abalone from the rocks and wash them up on shore. We're seeing very large numbers of empty shells of all different sizes. And this is again another photo from a local Mendocino man. So we're seeing impacts to the kelp forest and to the fishery. How did this happen? How did we get here? This was a series of events. It started in 2011. The very first event was a harmful algal bloom that hit Sonoma County waters. This harmful algal bloom released a toxin into the water and killed off many of the invertebrates, including abalone and urchins and sea stars. 2 years later, a much larger scale event occurred. There's sea star wasting disease hit the west coast of North America and moved all the way up into Alaska. It hit not just California. Killed off nearly all of the sea stars in the kelp forests on the west coast. Sea stars are one of the most important urchin predators on the north coast of California. And they're mostly gone now from our kelp forest. With the absence of the sea stars to keep the urchin populations down, we've seen a boom of purple urchin populations. We're now seeing 60 times more purple urchins on the north coast than we've ever seen in the past. And unlike the past, we have seen urchin barrens on the north coast before, but unlike the past, this is not an isolated area. This is miles of coastline. So this is very unprecedented, very large scale impact to our kelp forests all the way in the north coast. Coincidentally, at the same time that this was brewing, we also, in the last 2 years, have experienced extreme warm water events on the north coast and all the way up and down the coast, up into Alaska. These are images of data that show seawater temperatures in July off the west coast of North America. In 2011, we're showing that as an example of a normal year, and then the last 2 years. And the blue circle shows you where the region that we're talking about. So we had a warm blob in 2014, and then this last year is a combination of the continued warm blob and a strong El Nino event, making very warm waters. And warm water impacts the biology of kelp and also our abalone and urchin species. So we have ecological impacts from the urchin barren conditions and also biological impacts from the environmental conditions. So looking forward, what does this mean and what can we expect based on our past experiences? What do we expect to have happen? The most important question, I think, right now is what is the potential for the bull kelp on the north coast to recover, since that's the primary driver for the impacts to our fisheries. We need to understand 2 things in order to understand the potential for this kelp to come back. One is that we are in a situation of urchin barrens. Urchin barrens are persistent. in the absence of a major predator coming in and helping to dampen those populations, or perhaps a disease, those purple urchins can persist in low food conditions for a very long time. And they will effectively minimize the potential recruitment for the kelp to come back. So we expect that the urchin barrens will continue unless something happens. We have particular concern about the kelp forests on the north coast because of the species we're talking about. We're talking about bull kelp, which has a 1-year lifespan. This is different from the kelp species, a similar kelp species that you would find on the south coast, which is giant kelp. Giant kelps are perennials. It can die back, but as long as the base is there, it can grow back again 3 to 4 years later. The bull kelp, because it's an annual, requires that the spores are successful at creating a new kelp forest every single year. And we have had 2 years of very poor recruitment of the spores. It's very concerning because even if the urchins were to go back to normal conditions and the warm water conditions were to go back to normal, we might not see very quick recovery of this kelp forest on the north coast. So our expectations moving forward are that purple urchin barrens will persist on the north coast unless there is some other major change in the system. These will continue with the very poor conditions for red urchins and for red abalone, and may also potentially negatively impact other species, including rockfish, which require this habitat in their early years. We are already seeing socioeconomic impacts on the north coast, and those will continue. So our first task is to alert you and other policymakers of this issue. We're in communication with the fishing industry and the science community, and we will be updating our website and our blog to inform the public as we learn more. We also are wanting to identify research and monitoring needs so that we can better understand the future dynamics of this system. We have a lot of monitoring programs right now that we can leverage our past knowledge to compare with what the future brings. So the marine invertebrate team will continue to monitor conditions in the field of these populations, and including abalone health and reproductive indices and environmental conditions such as seawater temperature. We're also looking to develop a research program to understand the recovery potential of bull kelps on the north coast. All of the observations and many of the photos that I'm presenting to you were from the department's abalone North Coast dive team and our surveys. This is a long-standing collaboration between the marine invertebrate management team and law enforcement with the department. We also have lots of volunteer divers who are very dedicated, and I want to thank all of them for their hard work and contributions over the years. And I want to thank you for your attention, and I will take any questions if you have any.
President?
Dr. Catton, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, because I do. I'm sorry, Chuck, please.
Before questions, I just wanted to say one thing, and it's unusual perhaps. I can see in your face and your tone, you're scared. And you make me proud. And this has been a hard period for a lot of employees at the department because they're facing these kinds of risks to the very things they've dedicated their professional career to. So it's obvious, and thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would say Yes, thank you very much. I guess you would say you scared me. I mean, it is really terrifying, and it kind of leaves you speechless and without much thing to do about it. But I guess my first question is the purple urchin. You said that there's not much of a market. Is there no market for purple urchin meat, or is it just not a very strong one?
It's a much smaller urchin, and so it's not as easily marketable, I think, as the red urchin. It's a much bigger urchin. I think that there isn't much of it. There is a little market. I think that they do collect some purples, but they much prefer to collect the red urchins because they can get a better price for it. So that is one angle that we could try to look into. But that said, the purple urchin product would still be affected the same way the red urchin product is. They have enough reproductive organ to reproduce, but not really a lot to market. So there would have to be a different angle on what aspect of the purple urchin could be marketable.
Right, or just harvesting it just for the sake of reducing the population. Is that the next step? Is that something we're thinking about?
In the past, in Southern California, we've had urchin population control measures where people will take hammers to the urchins and kill them. There are a number of problems with that, and it's also not a long-term solution. These have been conducted on small spatial scales, and on the North Coast we're talking about a very large spatial scale. One of the things that I'm proposing to do is to work with the fishing industry to have very strategic removals so that we can have experimental sites and look at the potential for the kelp to self-recruit and return.
See if it works, yeah.
Yeah, see if it's even possible at this point.
Okay. Love you to come back after you've done some of that work to tell us what happened with it.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Williams.
Yeah, I was just going to say, first of all, thank you for that. And kind of echoing Director Bonham's comments, I think we're all gravely concerned about the situation that we face. And I think it's my understanding that obviously this is not limited to the west coast of the United States, but this is the sort of worldwide implications that have been witnessed in other parts. I don't know if you can comment on that and how we're sharing information with folks who are looking at other areas where they're experiencing the same kind of loss of kelp and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know about outside of the West Coast. We have, me and my colleagues, we are involved in the science community, and we've presented this information actually here in Sacramento in November at the Western Society of Naturalists Conference, where it's a regional conference of primarily marine ecologists who can get together and describe everything that we're seeing. So we had that opportunity then. We also keep regularly in contact with with other scientists in Washington and Canada. I think it's an important thing to look outside of California, and because the recruitment of our kelp may come from outside of California in the future. And also because other people might have some really great ideas for how to move forward with this. So because this is such a large-scale issue, I think it is an important thing to think beyond our borders. But I think it's primarily the purpose of this department and this committee to really focus on what can we do about our fishery grounds.